Today on Workshop Chat I want to talk about different factors that affect how fast your handsaw is cut. This is spurred on by a quite outrageous statement or comment that I got on last week's video with somebody saying that they could get all their cuts done with a maximum of 8 strokes of their saw, which is obviously outlandish and it is ridiculous if you think about all the factors that are involved in there. Yeah, it's a little bit crazy, but that's what spurred this video on, and it got me thinking that what different factors could be affecting you for your saw to actually cut, say, the way mine did in the last video with the 12 strokes. There is a number of factors that do affect that, and so whether you've got the saw that I've got or you've got different saws, I thought we'd talk about some of the limiting factors and factors that might affect the way your saw cuts. So with this, first up, I think the saw that you've got, the type of saw, actually has a big effect. Do you have a panel saw? Do you have a back saw? Do you have some other flush cut saw? Do you have a Japanese pull saw? The different types of saws are obviously going to cut differently, and one of the big factors there is the length of the saw plate. So obviously I'm going to be able to cut with way less strokes with this being 600 millimeters long versus a tenon saw here with a 12-inch plate. Sorry, my jumping between metric and imperial there. I'm just going off what it actually said on the saw thing, so inches and millimeters. So I'll try and leave conversions down below so it doesn't get too confusing. And so obviously a shorter saw plate is going to be cutting with more strokes than a longer saw plate doing the same depth of cut, let's say. Now, along with that, it does depend whether you're doing a rip cut or a cross cut and whether you've got rip or cross cut teeth. Along with that is how many teeth per inch is your saw. Obviously, a saw with less teeth is going to cut faster on average than a saw with more teeth, and that's going to be a faster, usually less presentable cut versus a slower, more presentable, more accurate cut. For instance, my small tenon here from Spear & Jackson is 12 teeth per inch. The large one here is 14 teeth per inch from Spear & Jackson. I have this other Robert Lee one here, this one's 15 teeth per inch. And the Spear & Jackson panel saw here, this is at 9 teeth per inch. And so this saw is going to cut with obviously more aggression and faster and less passes because it's got a longer saw plate and it's more aggressive than my tenon saw here that is a smaller plate and less teeth, or more teeth, sorry. And so they're the most glaring, obvious ones right up front. Now, there's obviously a lot of other things that do affect this, and we're just going to continue on with the tenon saws for one more moment. And that is the weight of the saw. Now, I say the back saws because our back saws tend to be heavier in weight than even our longest panel saws because they have the addition of a back. Whether it's brass or steel, they are still going to be heavier. Now, the brass varieties are better because the brass is heavier, and that is going to give a much heavier weight to your saw, and so when you're passing it through, it's going to cut faster because there's just more force being applied down on the wood. Now, this is obviously a force applied by the saw in a controlled manner that doesn't affect your accuracy of cut. And that leads me into the next thing. Now, how much force are you putting down on your saw when you're cutting? Well, ideally you shouldn't be putting any additional downward force on any of your saws. You want the saws to do the work, and so that's where something like the brass back, that weight is going to allow it to cut heavier, even though you're just moving it back and forwards and you're not binding right down on it, because if you do bind down on it, well, you're going to add inaccuracies and it's going to be harder for you to saw straight. So what I wanted to do is just show you the differences here in how many passes I can do with, just so we can get it done faster. I'm going to go with the small tenon down to depth, and I want to show you the difference of how fast it's going to cut when I really bind down on it versus just letting the saw do its work. So I've got this piece of 19mm stock here. So this first cut, I'm just going to let the saw do it itself. 1, 2. So that takes 11 strokes. Now I'm going to really bind down on it and see how fast we can go with it. Now that was only about 8 strokes. I didn't really count it because it was too hard to control it, but you can see that I actually wandered. I didn't cut particularly straight, although it's still straighter than I would have expected. And I cut a lot faster, but if you're doing for accuracy, if you're going like this, and you're not doing full strokes, and you're just binding down on it, it's harder when you actually bind down on the saw. So if I'm really binding down on it, so that was 7 strokes just then. But it is so much harder because you're putting weight down on it that you're going to lose your accuracy. So you can see that if you put too much force down, you're going to lose accuracy, but you will cut faster. And so don't do that. Don't put downward force on your cuts. Let the saw do the work. By putting too much weight down on it, you're going to tire yourself out, you're going to put extra stress on your joints, it's going to be harder to keep your saw accurate, it's going to be harder to do full stroke lengths of your saw, and it is just going to add inaccuracy. But you can see that this is a vital one that I did when I first started. I used to put a lot of force down on there, and then I realized that if you've got a nice sharp saw, and that's going to be the next thing, is your saw sharp? Because a blunt saw is obviously going to take more passes. It's pretty straightforward, pretty self-explanatory that a blunt saw is going to take more passes to complete your work, and you might be more inclined to put that extra weight down on it to speed that process up, and all you have to do is a quick little resharpen or a retouch up, and you know, you can have your saw working without all these extra forces to add an accuracy into your cuts. Now obviously along with this, the timber you're using. Now it's pretty straightforward that the timber you use in terms of how thick it is, how thin it is, and also whether it's a soft or a hardwood is going to adjust how fast you saw. So what I wanted to do here, we've obviously just seen me cut this here, so with 11 strokes doing normal technique. So let's take that piece of pine out, and I'm going to put this big chunky piece of construction pine in here. And we'll see how long this takes. I'm going to establish it. That was 28 passes there, or at least that's what I counted. And obviously you can see the limitations of cutting such thick wood with such a short saw blade. And that is partially why you have added inaccuracies, because the more passes you do, the less accurate you're going to be. But you can see that you're going to require a lot more passes to remove material on something much thicker, because teeth have to clear a lot more material, and therefore a lot more strokes to remove the material. Now, similarly, how hard your timber is. This is just pine. If I was to go and saw this piece of jarrah, now this is 15 millimeters thick, and I had a similar amount of strokes as to what I did in this piece of pine at 19 millimeters thick. And so you can see that the hardwoods have a similar effect to cutting wider boards as well. And so it all comes together eventually. And also other limiting factors can be silica content in your wood and how curly the grain is, and all these sort of things that all come together that do affect how you saw. Now, one other vital thing when it comes to how you're sawing and what can affect it is, are you using correct sawing technique? Have you got your wrist locked with your finger pointed? Are you locking the wrist, the elbow and the shoulder? Are you keeping everything in alignment, or are you wandering all over like this, which is definitely going to affect not only how accurate and how straight you cut, but also how many passes are required. And you've got a lot of wasted movement if you've got your elbow floating around, or you're coming through and you're bashing your elbow into your side and things like that. It does mean that you're not going to be in that perfect fluid movement where the saw can actually just run nice and free and do its job. So you might be more inclined to lean over. That throws your eye out of alignment, which is not something I've really talked about before, but keeping your eye in alignment with your cut actually is also another thing. The brain connection to everything. If you've got your eye in alignment with your cut, I find you're going to saw straighter than if you're over here and then leaning back and looking across, because you're going to be able to see your sight line a lot easier as well, for one, but it also does throw the rest of the body all out and your mechanics completely out, and then obviously the movement of your arm through. And so we can see that there are a lot of factors here that do affect how fast your saw cuts. And going back to the saw for one moment, there's one other thing, or two other things that can affect it, and that is how thick your saw plate is, and along with that, how much set you have on your saw. And so what we're talking about here is how wide the kerf is that you're sawing. A thinner kerf, the saw is going to have less friction and move through faster. If you don't have enough set, your saw plate's going to get bound up, and that'll slow it down. And is your saw plate, does it have any sort of factory rust prevention on there that can get all bound up and get sticky and bind the saw? Have you got your saw plate all polished up? Is it rusty? Is it brand new? A lot of these factors all come into play. And one other thing that I found is, if I've got a saw like this one here that's uncomfortable to the hand and doesn't fit well, and your hand sort of slides around on it a lot, I find that that can affect your control of the saw and, once again, how fast it cuts. So there you have it, folks. As you can see, there is a myriad of different factors that affect how fast your saw cuts. The type of saw, how thick the plate is, the amount of set you've got on, and so there's a lot of things in here in terms of the tool itself, and also your own mechanics and the way you've learned and the way you operate your saw yourself. So I hope this video stirs up some conversation down in the comments so we can help everyone overcome the various factors that they might be coming up with. And please do leave any questions and issues that you're running into with your saws down below, and hopefully as a community together we can answer these and help everybody out. And if you'd like to see another video such as this, do check that video up here where I show you the quickest way to get your saw operating from brand new. Bye for now.